What is really going on here? You're never going to find out from the media. They're a part of the problem.
Fix the Media, an independent media solidarity production, with your host, Peter Klein.
Thursday night and you're feeling right. That's right. The media is corrupt. I smell soft news. Soft news is the only news the mainstream media is capable or should be allowed to report. But actually, they don't just report soft news, they report lots of hard news too. In fact, good old guys like Mark Levin. Mark Levin is going to tell you something. He's going to tell you something about Iran. Apparently Iran is real frightening, real scary. Ayatollah this and Mufti that. And I'm not sure these guys know what they're talking about, but I do know they're real pointed in their points about, Iran is going to, look what they've done. They've screwed us over. They tricked us. Iran tricked America. You ever look at a map? These guys should look at a map. They should also look at what life in Iran is like. About, I'd say, pushing 10 years ago on The Daily Show, they had they had one Daily Show correspondent. I don't remember which guy, but they sent him over to Iran, and he played it like it was a comedy bit in that, well, obviously it being on The Daily Show, it has to be funny. So they did this bit, and he was frightened to go to Iran, and he was trying to, he was going to report back on, where the terrorists were hiding and their terrorist sentiments and all this. And he winds up going to this family's house. They invite him for dinner, and it's just a middle-class house, and they were just middle-class people, and they expressed no resentment towards America. It was all very mundane, and it seemed almost ridiculous to the point where I got the point that we're trying to make, was that it was overblown. And then for whatever reason, a couple of years later, Jon Stewart actually takes time off the show, and that's when you get that, whoever the guy is, one of these new guys that now either hosted the John Oliver or something. I think they let John Oliver host the show for half the season because Jon Stewart was off directing a film, and it was something about how Iran was bad. I don't remember what it's about, but it's something like that. And I wonder if that's what that was about, was paying the price for that. Because look, we're not going to let you do this and get away with it, John. You can't go over there to Iran and show that they're just regular folks, because we've got something going on. It's more important to have to put through to the citizens of America. Well, welcome to Fix the Media. It is Thursday night. I am Peter Klein, your host. I am sick as a dog. I don't know if you can tell. It's been very hard. With this past week, I was working super long hours. I maybe only got between 3 and 5 hours of sleep per night, which is not great for me. And then, I've had to deal with the death of my best friend. And also I just got sick. And so today I spent most of the day in bed sweating. But you're in for a treat, because we had planned already to play for you this episode number 4 although I'm going to stop tracking these episodes from now on, because they're just going to start flying. I'm not going to care what episode it is. We're just going to stay on track, one following the next. It's like right foot, left foot, that type of thing. We're going to play the first half of a pre-production documentary that was supposed to be and will eventually be turned into a documentary production promoting the Fix the Media project. And that first half is narrated by myself, but will, in the final product, be, after quite a bit of revision, will be narrated by a professional, I'm sure. But that's what we have coming up for you tonight, on tonight's show. You know, it's a really good thing that we're going to be playing this first half of this documentary, pre-production documentary, because, you know, I have a mind to, and a heart to, just tell it like it is. Just lay it on the line. Just take the gloves off. You know, I've never taken the gloves off. I've never done that. And were I to do that, I'm afraid of the consequences. And, you know, I was getting some unwanted attention about a month ago, and then the unwanted attention just ended abruptly. It was right at the time when I got hired at this job at Macy's, and I don't know what happened. I was hoping they would come to me directly and tell me, hey, what's going on, you know, guys? Kind of want to know. And so if those guys are listening, why don't you just come to me and tell me? Send me one of those disappearing emails or something. I know you can do it. Or maybe you can't. Why didn't you talk to me? I was right there. Anyway, so there's that. That's the mindset I'm in. I'm just exhausted. I'm drained. I'm at the end of my rope, I guess. Here's a piece of rope right here. I actually have a piece of rope. It's only a foot long, though. Something from Macy's. Some kind of hangy thing. There's a lot of hangy things. I come home, I got stuff in my pockets. Crap and stuff. It's good crap and stuff, though. But anyway, so what we're going to do is we're going to play that first half of the I can't do the whole thing because the whole thing is not done. We actually only got it produced, pre-produced, to the halfway point. And in the end, there's going to be a lot of revisions, and some of this material is going to be included. Some of it will be cut. So that's the interesting thing, is what you're going to get a chance to hear tonight may not appear in the final version. But that's fine. And it's all good material. What we're going to see in this one, we try to recall, I'm going to just give you a quick overview of what we're looking at here. How this is going to be laid out is we're going to get some good examples of how the media behaves, what they tend to do, what their projects are like. I talk a little bit about, I think in the beginning we describe how the media has a lot of outfits and institutions, organizations like CBS, for instance, and Life magazine, that began life as essentially branches of government. And that's an interesting thing that people tend not to think about. And when they do think about that type of thing, they don't imagine that an entire network like CBS would be established for that purpose. And were they established for that purpose, how would they be any different today? Well, they wouldn't be. If anything, they would be just they would have better refined the process. So that's what I think we've got going on. And we cover some of that. We name the names and so forth. Then we go into the FCC. Now, there's quite a bit of material here, in fact. Some of this will get cut, I imagine, because we need to condense that segment. But one pretty lengthy segment is on the FCC, and it's specifically about this internet freedom legislation that went in just last year in 2015. And how the media portrays, now the FCC is a branch of government, but both the media and the FCC were promoting the idea that 4 million people, 4 million people wrote in with their opinions on the issue. Yeah, 4 million Americans wrote in. Yeah, that's right, they did. They really did. Of course, that's just a lie. It's so unbelievable as to be ridiculous. But they don't care. They'll say it. And they want you to believe it. And most people, I think, did, or at least they just didn't care. People don't care. Apathy is like the one thing that America's built on, apathy over the past, let's say, 50 years. Since Kennedy. Since we got the Beatles and the mop tops, hey, we had something to listen to on the radio. And now they got me to listen to on the radio. And they still don't care, but you care. I know you do. And that's all that matters, is what you as an individual care about because you are the one who is going to, on their behalf, do the right thing and to step up, use your discernment skills, and with care and with attention to detail, actually take steps, measures to improve the world around you by targeting the specific harms, the specific ills, and the media being one that it's a clear target. I mean, recent polls show as much as 90% of Americans don't trust the media. Now, why did they put that out? I have no idea, because it doesn't look good for them. But I guess they just, in the end, don't care. It's just another titillating news segment for them. But at any rate, I'm digressing and I need to get back to the point. And the point is, we're going to listen to the first half of this pre-production early version of a documentary that will be in support of the Fix the Media project. And let's take a listen to that right now. We're going to have a commercial break here at the halfway point of the show, and then we'll get back and go right back into it. And then we'll follow up with a brief comment from myself, Peter Klein, your host on Fix the Media. Thanks for listening. Thursday night, and you're feeling right. Here you go.
Attention, American citizens and managers of the corporate news media monopoly. It is hereby proclaimed that the continued operation of the privileged media monopoly is no longer wanted. The publishing and broadcasting of propaganda constitutes a conflict of interest and, in some cases, treason. American citizens and the independent media are taking measures to bring about the dismantling of this monopoly and the restoration of a free press in America.
After years of controversy, scientists still disagree about the alleged hazards of cigarette smoking.
Absolute chaos and carnage here. It must be some sort of napalm.
The BBC airs exactly the same footage but digitally alters the word napalm for, quote, chemical weapons, hoping no one will notice.
Absolute chaos and carnage here. It must be some sort of chemical weapon.
The free press is a critical component of a free society. The news media, or the Fourth Estate, is as vital to the American Republic as the three branches of government. The press must act as a watchdog and alert the public to matters of which they wish to be informed. The press must safeguard against the abuse of power, threats that might cause harm to the public, financial wrongdoing, and political corruption. It must function as a chronological record of events, forming our collective history for future reference. Security and prosperity are not easily achieved by the individual in an advanced society. The press must provide this service to the public at large. It's not all that different from a friend that collects your mail and checks on your home while you're away on vacation. Although it can't serve individual needs as well as a community or neighborhood can, it must act in the general interest of the greater public. Although the media's delivery methods include newspapers, television stations, cable networks, magazines, blogs, and websites, not all of what is published or broadcast by the media is news. It's the publishers and broadcasters of news that constitute the press. The press or news media must be objective, neutral, and impartial. Equally important, it must maintain skepticism and a critical attitude of government and business. As such, the press must remain independent from government or corporate interests. A free press is simply not possible if it is part of or controlled by government. Likewise, it can't exist if its corporate financial, political, or ideological interests outweigh its interest in serving the public. The present conglomeration of news media corporations in America no longer serves the public's interests. The news media is highly consolidated, so much so that it constitutes a media monopoly. There is an absence of news reporting of matters that are significant or essential to the American people. What is reported is largely propaganda that serves the interests of the monopoly and in many cases results in direct harm to the public. The news media now enjoys an undeserved, privileged status. Unfortunately for American citizens, many of the familiar news media outlets are either acting fully under the government's control or in a public-private partnership. They are therefore not a part of the free press. The present state of the American media is already known by many to be problematic. For instance, most Americans know that the entire spectrum of media publications, channels, and outlets is owned by only a few companies. To get a quick snapshot of the media at the present time, let's look to the IFM, Institute of Media and Communications Policy, a non-profit research center based in Germany. They maintain a list of the top 100 international media corporations by earnings. Their list includes some cable providers that don't themselves produce much content. As you can see, the top 10 are all names you're probably familiar with: Comcast, Google, the Walt Disney Company, News Corp, DirecTV, Viacom, Time Warner, Sony Entertainment, Bertelsmann, Apple. But only 6 of these corporations produce 90% of the media in America: Comcast, News Corp, Disney, Viacom, Time Warner, and CBS. And they earn between $300 and $400 billion each year. So, when only 200 media executives control the news and entertainment media in America, there's less diversity of news, greater redundancy, greater risk of propaganda, and overall corruption. But the rest of the answer to the question, how did this happen, partly involves our view of the media being a paradigm. Not everything is what it appears to be. This problem goes way back, but let's go only back to the 1940s. After World War II, a State Department official named Frank Wisner was charged with creating a program of employing members of the media and placing operatives within the media for the purpose of controlling news in America. The publisher of the Washington Post and former Army intel officer Philip Graham was selected to direct the program, which was called Operation Mockingbird. Some of America's most respected news outfits were born from more ambitious government programs. A military colonel became the founder of CBS. He then hires employees of the CIA to work at CBS undercover. A former executive at Time magazine becomes director of the Operations Coordination Board. CIA employee Walter Annenberg, who had just been indicted with his father in the biggest tax evasion case in history, founded TV Guide. By the early 50s, Mockingbird employed nearly 600 men and women at the New York Times, Newsweek, CBS, and other outlets. When Alan Dulles took over the program, they added 25 newspapers and wire agencies: William Paley of CBS, C.D. Jackson of Fortune magazine, Henry Luce of Time magazine, and Arthur Hayes Sulzberger of the New York Times. As said by former CIA Director William Colby and cited by Dave McGowan in his book Derailing Democracy, the Central Intelligence Agency owns everyone of any significance in the major media. And that's just the CIA. There are 2 critical points to make about the FCC. First, the FCC is both a department of government with over 1,700 employees and an independent agency governed by just 5 appointed commissioners. So when the FCC acts, it does so independent of Congress. Second, the FCC is the regulatory agency overseeing the media, including the news media. All broadcasters and publishers are required to be licensed by the FCC. You may therefore conclude that the news media has at least moderate requirements that it report the news under standards of ethics and that it serve the public interests. It may surprise you then to learn how the FCC truly works. The FCC is more like a transportation authority in what it chooses to focus on. Its strategic plan from as recent as 2011 includes 6 areas of focus. They are broadband, competition, spectrum, media, public safety and homeland security, and modernization. When the plan does reference media, it states that media regulations must promote competition and diversity. In short, the FCC might help to ensure you get broadband, cable television, and mobile phone service without discrimination, at a reasonable cost, and without presenting any threat of Islamic terrorism to you. But what CNN, Fox News, and even PBS chooses to produce for you isn't their concern, unless it involves nudity, in which case they can impose massive fines. But if CBS decided to broadcast a modern version of the War of the Worlds as a news teleplay, and if that resulted in a rise in suicides and a lot of missed work, that's their prerogative. What I suspect eliminates any hope the FCC can be of help is first that they've been there watching all along. And rather than crack down on substandard or unethical news reporting, they've simply eased up on their licensing requirements. For example, most Americans consider the 24-hour cable news channel Fox News to be required to report the news. But that's not exactly true. To meet the paltry licensing standards, Fox News specifies that they only report news between the hours of 1 a.m. and 3 a.m. Fox News only reports news 2 out of every 24 hours, and they do it only in the dead of night. So set your DVRs. And the FCC is also corrupt, which can easily be ascertained by considering what I've just explained while factoring in the open internet they voted in last year, more commonly known as the net neutrality rule. It basically put the internet under FCC control in America. Watch FCC Chairman Tom Wheeler give the most important pitch of his life.
Nearly 4 million people who participated in this proceeding. You told us you were concerned about the future of the internet, and your participation has made this the most open proceeding in FCC history. Not all of you agreed with each other, and not all of you agreed with the action that we're going to take today. But you made our process, and thus our decision, stronger. We listened, and we learned.
Sounds great. The most open process in FCC history. Of course, those 4 million comments weren't all from Americans. They were largely blank template submissions spammed by lobbying groups, and even to date, nobody's been able to report how many were in support of net neutrality and how many were opposed. But as Tom says, you listened and you learned.
4 million Americans wrote this agency to make known their ideas, thoughts, and deeply held opinions about internet openness. They lit up our phone lines, clogged our email inboxes, and jammed our online comment system. That might be messy, but whatever our disagreements are on network neutrality, I hope we can agree that that's democracy in action and something we can all support.
Yes, democracy in action and something we can all support. And all 3 Democrats that voted in favor of the rule made similarly goofy statements. But it looked like there might be a return to sanity when the 2 dissenting chairmen made their statements.
We are flip-flopping for one reason and one reason only. President Obama told us to do so.
I'm asking the FCC to reclassify internet service under Title II of a law known as the Telecommunications Act.
Pai's comments went on like that for about 15 minutes, and they were scathing. But the remaining FCC administration and their partners in the media were able to resume their mental recess. That is, until at least one citizen was smart enough to understand this was their best opportunity to be heard.
It's obvious the internet's a common carrier. It brings us all equally to the net, where we can all go without any prejudice or bias, without any kind of discrimination. We don't want to see that end. We want to see the FCC do its job and regulate the internet for the people, not to regulate it for the corporations. We don't want you driving under the influence of Comcast. We want you driving the influence of the people.
In the 21st century, the internet is our free speech, but in this country, we're losing to free speech. The internet was created with our public dollars as part of the public commons. It should never have been reclassified. We need to put it back in the...
I'm kidding. I signed up to join the United States Army 45 years ago. I pledged to defend and support the United States Constitution, including the First Amendment. You're trying to destroy First Amendment rights to free speech and free press. I am totally against that. No, that's okay. I can be a resident. Yeah, you can't follow me.
Okay, we now have...
And the commons are for all the people.
You could tell that there was a lot of love in that room. The chair people smiling with glazed expressions while chatting amongst themselves is one clue as to their attitudes. I can remember back on the day of the vote in February, there was so much buildup of media messaging that I was literally shocked when the vote finally took place.
As we vote for a fast, fair, and open internet. And with that, I will call for the yeas and nays. All in favor, say aye. Aye.
Aye.
Opposed?
No.
The ayes have it. The item is carried.
Okay, we've spent plenty of time on the boring old FCC. Now it's time to move on to the really offensive material. Nobody said the truth was pretty. I said earlier that our perception of the media is a paradigm, but that's also true of the media's perceptions of itself. A paradigm is often just another way of describing when a particular perception is false. So we, as Americans, live in a country in which not only its citizens have a false view of the media, but the media largely has a false view of itself. Our fond remembrances and cherished beliefs are fables cooked up to keep you away from your share of the American dream. But the writers needed to make sure the fable would take root and even grow more deeply in the halls of academia. For over 40 years now, the American public has lived under the yoke of deep throat. Under the cover of investigative journalism and press freedom, America was given a ball of lies and forced to think it was a shining example of freedom and that the system works. First, Deep Throat was identified as only a secret informant. Decades later, the writers lied again by claiming Deep Throat was a former FBI associate director who was battling dementia and couldn't manage to deny the claim. In truth, if anyone could be given credit as being Deep Throat, it's Alexander Haig. He was the guy the press never reported on, despite being a former second highest ranking Army officer and Supreme Allied Commander over all European forces and NATO, and just happened to be the White House Chief of Staff under the Nixon administration. But it isn't really Haig you need to focus on to get the big picture. To do that only requires that you know Haig was the true source of information they attributed to an anonymous source in the fictional story called Watergate and the dutiful members of America's free press. Remember this guy? He's Daniel Ellsberg, the hero activist that leaked the Pentagon Papers. You probably think he's a hero, or at least a good guy, but that's the legend of the American news media talking. I'm going to help you step back and remove another false layer of the news media's credibility. You're certain to know who this guy is. It's Edward Snowden, another hero activist. The difference between Snowden and Ellsberg is that Ellsberg is a lifetime actor in the production of the mythos of American history, the necessity of American brand democracy, and the legitimacy of the press. Snowden, however, will likely exit the stage to work on other projects, while Ellsberg can still be found boasting of his heroism at any number of gay pride parades. How about these two guys? I think they're way more damaging to you and the American people than the rest of the cast. It's Bob Woodward and Carl Bernstein, who wrote about the Watergate scandal in the Washington Post newspaper, a popular propaganda outlet published by America's secret press department. And just to complete our cast before I show you how they put it all together, there's this little guy. Do you know who he is? Why, he's the tape recorder that Nixon requested be recording his private White House communications at all times. Americans became familiar with the recorder through the recordings that became associated with the Watergate scandal, also known as the Nixon tapes.
All right, you've been listening to the first half of, which will be actually the first half of and the pre-production version of what will eventually be a documentary in support of the Fix the Media project. And as I said earlier on at the beginning of the show, we're going to go ahead and take our regular commercial break, another 90-second break. We have yet to actually get any advertisers for the show, but we want people listening now and people out there who might have an interest to know that we do want to secure some advertising to support the program. So please contact us. FixTheMedia.com. The website is about to go live, and when it does, you can find our contact information there, and we'll make it as easy and as painless as possible. So let's just take a 90-second commercial break, and we'll return to our pre-production version of the Fix the Media documentary for the remainder of the show when we get back. You're listening to Fix the Media. This is your host, Peter Klein. We'll be right back, so stay tuned. Thank you for listening to Fix the Media on the Awake Radio Network, or one of its rebroadcast partners, like the On Air Radio Network. The Awake Radio Network can be found by visiting awakeradio.us. Fix the Media is an independent media solidarity production. IMS can be found on the web at mediasolidarity.com. Fix the Media can be found on the web at fixthemedia.com. Fix the Media isn't just a radio show or podcast. It's also an IMS project that seeks to expose and curb media corruption. Fix the Media is just beginning to take shape and eventually will become a movement that will restore trust in the media by returning it to the people. You are the hero in your own story, and together we are the heroes that will end the era of media corruption. You can play a part in this historical event by simply visiting fixthemedia.com and following along as the project unfolds. You know it, we know it. The media is corrupt, and it's up to us to change that. Soviet Union, and in the meeting rooms of any American think tank, this recorder would be known as a bug. But when the American news media tells a lie, sometimes they go big, and to pass off their fable as being real required a number of big lies. So now we have the cast of our mythical narrative, but we haven't yet specified the greater myth they were cast to establish, nor have we specified what true motive lay underneath. Above all, these characters helped establish the myth that, under the current system, there was hope, and that justice could be had. In addition, they helped create the false notion that the press in America value the truth, and no amount of government overreach can squash their hard-hitting journalism. Lastly, they promoted the myth that activists with political issues Americans were interested in were hard at work making things better. For example, the anti-war movement and the environmentalists. The motives were fairly easy to figure out, as they are about the same as authority has had throughout the ages. America's ruling factions employed the brightest minds at academic institutions and think tanks to study society and trends. They wanted to predict which way the wind was blowing and what threats might come to exist to their power. Any legitimate movements of the people are viewed as a threat to the power structure, who only wish to do as they wish and continue living off the backs of American citizens as they have for generations. Right away, well before the end of World War II, the answers began to come in that the citizens were becoming aware of these injustices and were growing more willing to actually perform their civic duty in order to address them. I can't stress strongly enough how much of history since the mid-1950s has been fabricated to manage the populations of the world. It sounds kind of crazy before you step back and observe the undeniable facts. Then it's up to you to decide if you're willing to continue believing. As we back away from the stage, we begin to see lesser-known facets of Daniel Ellsberg. It doesn't take long before his true purpose comes into focus, and we wonder, how stupid were we for not seeing it earlier?
After the Bolsheviks took over the Soviet Union, effectively destroying the country and killing millions along the way, many Soviet Bolshevik Jews immigrated to the U.S. This was the case with Daniel's parents, who ended up in Chicago. Biographies tend to ignore any details about Daniel's parents, except to say that they converted from Judaism to Christianity. Since subversion and deception are the two most common tactics of Bolshevik strategy, Daniel was certain to have been born and raised as a lifetime actor who would do whatever it took to achieve the aims of the collective. Not to belabor Ellsberg's role much further, the important pieces needed to see the truth are right out in the open. He began his education by going to Harvard on a scholarship before studying at Cambridge through a Woodrow Wilson Fellowship. He then joins the Marines and leaves after 3 years as a first lieutenant. Then it's back to Harvard to join the Society of Fellows before getting his first job. Just as expected with everyday patriotic Americans, his first job is as a strategic analyst for the Rand Corporation. He then completes his economics PhD and then goes to work at the Defense Department. He gets a job that takes him to South Vietnam in 1964 under General Edward Lansdale and the State Department. When he returns, he resumes his work at Rand. Ellsberg was said to have contributed to Rand's study of conduct in the Vietnam War, but that's not for you nor I to know. But I think it hints at why the whole Nixon-Watergate deep throat fable was created in the first place. There probably were studies and at least reports laying around that would, if ever seen by the public, have brought the whole thing crashing down. So they determined they had to drown out the voices of American activists who presented a threat to them on virtually every front. After all, a criminal and lethal protection racket isn't built on sound and just principles. Neither then are its malignant enforcement branches. America's now totally complicit media became the mouthpiece of the storytellers, and what a story they told. If you doubt how I've chosen to view this period of American history, or whether it could have disguised total government propaganda as expert journalism, consider this. The reporting of Woodward and Bernstein is thought by many to be the single greatest reporting effort of all time. You better hope that that's true, but I'm suggesting to you it isn't. It won't take us long to blow apart half of the greatest reporting effort of all time. Bob Woodward was given to us as the prototypical investigative journalist. The problem is that he has no formal training in journalism and does have a shady background, including Yale University and the secret society Book and Snake. Back in 1971, nobody was questioning how some lit major had suddenly become a prominent reporter for the Washington Post. Later, however, the problem began to emerge and required evasive maneuvering. It was decided that an old and defunct weekly newspaper based out of Maryland, the Montgomery Sentinel, would serve as a fake entry on Bob's resume. So, the official biography of Woodward now shows him as a reporter for this tiny weekly paper with no official subscribership and only sold occasionally through a few 7-Eleven stores. Only after working there for a full year does he get the job at the Post, which began publishing a false history with lasting impact. Woodward's key position is used to publish the totally invented story of the Rand Corporation statist who had a change of heart, the top-level assassination squad that dropped their weapons and surrendered to a couple beat cops at the Watergate, and the dutiful but power-hungry president who somehow wound up in trouble because he bugged his own office. Are you buying any of that? I did for many years, but it only took a brief, closer look to realize it was all a fairy tale. Arriving at that conclusion was made much easier and quicker thanks to the reporting of people like Wayne Madsen, Russ Baker, Cheryl Atkinson, James Tracy, Scott Creighton, and Miles Mathis. The greatest barrier I had to overcome in order to realize so much of our collective history is fabrication is my perception of the media. I kept assuming that there were too many voices and too much diversity in the news media for it to all go unreported. Then I began to see evidence of people reporting the truth back when events were taking place. Unfortunately for us, those people were never allowed to achieve prominence or authority. Making matters worse, much of what was reported had been tossed down the memory hole. As I had these revelations, I viewed many institutions within government, like universities and police departments, and even those outside government, like advocacy groups, as being a part of the media. I knew at least that they were advising the media and were the source of the news. It still remains a mystery to me the exact mechanisms by which so many lies and false news reports can proliferate across the entire spectrum of news media outlets. I began to see how the system works by noting that sometimes the truth is reported and following the trail from there. The problem is that no reporter is willing to challenge an official source, no matter how ludicrous the storyline. They never take two inconsistent elements of a story and connect them to form an obvious alternative explanation. Nor do they employ common sense when presented with obvious evidence of a crime or cover-up. In the worst cases, reporters actually offer not the official cover-up nor the truth, but some third, less nefarious explanation. They do so sometimes as a mere obfuscation of the truth, and other times to create the impression that they're muckraking and capable of reporting the truth. But even more commonly, the problem is simply that no reporter follows the story. One story that's a perfect example of this refusal by reporters to connect elements of a story and arrive at perfectly common sense conclusions is the tragic John F. Kennedy Jr. plane crash. If you're not familiar with the basics of the story, JFK Jr., his wife, and her sister were reported to have been flying to Martha's Vineyard on July 16, 1999, when their plane crashed into the ocean. There are a few things to consider before we look at what was reported following the incident. First, JFK's Piper Saratoga was an extremely advanced and well-liked airplane. It had autopilot, a black box, and was considered the smoothest and most flyable plane in its class. JFK Jr. was also said to have been a cautious and concerned pilot. In fact, many friends and co-pilots reported that he never flew without an instructor co-pilot. His over 300 hours of flight time qualified him for an instructor's permit, and he had recently been qualified for instrument flight, which means he was capable of flying solely by instrument readings. The first reports by the media were from the Coast Guard, which reported that visibility had been cleared to 8 miles, and that JFK had last communicated his final descent to the control tower at 9:39 p.m. Initial reports also said he had a co-pilot. But then the media contact was switched to the Defense Department, and the story totally changed. They claimed the weather was very windy and visibility was low. They also claimed there was no contact with the control tower as reported previously. When a plane announces its approach for landing, 2 alarms are set and both are tied to the plane's transponder. The first alarm is triggered if the plane descends below 100 feet anywhere outside of the landing area, and the second is triggered if the plane doesn't land within 5 minutes. When either alarm is triggered, a search for the plane is mounted, usually within 5 minutes' time. Can you guess how long it took before they began the search for JFK's missing plane? 14.5 hours. That's right. It was reported that after a couple hours, Ted Kennedy called both the FAA and Coast Guard and was assured that a search was forthcoming. After more time passed without sign of a search, he called and woke up President Bill Clinton, who then reportedly called and demanded the search begin. During the many hours that a search was still not undertaken, the news made numerous reports from unnamed sources and supposed friends of the Kennedy family. They were almost all admonishing JFK Jr. and created the impression that he was an inexperienced, reckless, and a careless pilot. When the plane was finally found, days later, some interesting things were found. First, the plane's fuel switch was in the off position, which would have cut fuel to the engine and made powered flight impossible. Second, the passenger seat had been unbolted and was missing. Third, the black box's battery had been removed. And fourth, the flight log was missing, which would have indicated the names of the passengers on the flight. It was later reported that Carolyn Bissett, JFK's wife, was pregnant with a boy and in her 3rd trimester at the time of her death. Perhaps nothing is more convincing of the media's true purpose than statements made by newsmen themselves. One such example is the statements made by John Swinton, the former chief of staff at the New York Times. He was speaking to a gathering of journalists at the New York Press Club and likely didn't intend his message for the public at large. And it's just as likely that he was inebriated to some degree. But that doesn't diminish the meaning of what he spoke. What makes the statements even more significant is that Swinton was at the Times throughout the period of the Civil War, and his statements were made not long after.
There is no such thing in America as an independent press. You are all slaves. There is not one of you who dares to express an honest opinion. If I should allow honest opinions to be printed in one issue of my paper, I would be like Othello before 24 hours. The man who would be so foolish as to write honest opinions would be out on the street hunting for another job. The business of a New York journalist is to distort the truth, to lie outright, to pervert, to vilify, to fawn at the feet of mammon, and to sell his country and his race for his daily bread. We are the tools and vassals of rich men behind the scenes. We are jumping jacks. They pull the string and we dance. Our time, our talents, our lives, our possibilities are all the property of other men. We are intellectual prostitutes.
And there you have it. Not bad, eh? And you know, I bet you didn't think we were going to get into the JFK Jr. assassination. But yeah, we did. And it was a lot to do with the way the media handled it. The media seemed to be just all too willing to go along with the narrative. Apparently the narrative was that it's normal to go ahead and wait the 14 plus hours before actually initiating a search party for, or a search and rescue effort for a downed plane, especially when they had, they knew where he was at, they had the transponder, all of these things. And we explained how, you know, if you descend too swiftly, or if you do not appear within a certain area of the landing zone, you're going to be, you know, within 5 minutes, it's going to trigger these alarms. And those alarms were intended to trigger a search and rescue effort immediately. And I want to remind the listener that I am very ill at this moment, so if I sound that way, please understand. You know, I've got a bucket here. I'm ready to spew, and I don't know what it is. It's probably because I was exposed to the media as a child, and it's catching up. You know, I have to get the evil out of me somehow, I would imagine. I don't know how you would expunge this material. But so the JFK thing in particular, there's a reason why it's in there, and it's because the media played along, but it's also really sick because you can see how the media has a direct impact on our world. And you know, if you look at it this way, Hillary Clinton was going to be a senator in New York one way or another, and guess who stood in her way, right? JFK Jr. Now, what I like to say about JFK Jr. is that he was a threat to the entire political system in America. Because that son of a gun was attractive. He was intelligent. I mean, he played within the circles of both on the side of good and the side of evil. And yet I don't think that he was an evil character. I think he was probably a good guy trying to do the best that he could. He was a young man. But let me tell you, you get those guys. Imagine a presidential debate between Hillary Clinton, Donald Trump, and JFK Jr. I mean, the question should be something like this. Mrs. Clinton, are you actually human? You look more like a troll. And as I think that could be applied to Donald Trump as well. And that also this also brings to mind this issue currently, this presidential election issue. I'm blown away that anyone gives a crap. Why would anyone care? Why does anyone pay any attention? And everybody wants to take a side, you know, like, let's talk about how bad Hillary is. Yeah, Hillary's awful. Let's talk about how bad Donald Trump is. Yeah, Donald Trump's awful. Yeah, I remind everyone that Donald Trump, when Donald Trump becomes president, can you imagine what America is going to be? You realize that, right? Donald Trump will be the president of America. You understand that, right? What is so hard to understand about that? It's disgusting. It's now, you know, Trump supporters out there. Oh, okay, fine. Yeah, he probably hasn't actually killed anyone. directly. He doesn't have the blood on his hands like a Hillary Clinton does. But he's still a pretty bad guy. You got to figure, there's been a lot that's come out over the years on this gentleman, or just this guy. And all this crap, he's a showman. Now he's the P.T. Barnum of politics, that's for sure. There's nothing wrong with that in one sense. If you were doing it for the right reasons, and maybe he is, who knows? I doubt it. I think he's just another guy doing and I still think it's possible that Trump is running exclusively because of some, he's doing it at someone else's command, and the reason is that he's being coerced. They have something on him, and he just doesn't want it coming out, and he figures, well, they'll just let it out. If they had enough time to put another candidate in there, and Jeb Bush, I hope you're listening, then maybe they would, he could escape from their clutches, and they would go ahead and run someone like Jeb Bush up the flagpole. But it's unlikely that either of those scenarios would come to pass, and it looks like it's going to be a Hillary and Donald Trump presidency. So one of the two, you got to pick. You got to figure we're in a bad spot. The media is not going to help you. They are not going to help you. We're going to have to do something. Look, the reason why we're calling this fix the media is because something's broken. And when something's broken, you don't just go climb under the covers and hope that somehow, magically, everything just works out. That's not how things get fixed. You have to fix it. Now, if you want to procrastinate a little longer, then, well, that's all, that's on you. And things are going to worsen. The problems are going to worsen, and something that's broken in one area can be broken in another area. I'm trying to think of analogies here, but it doesn't make any sense to even bother. You understand the problem is we have a broken media, and it needs to be fixed. Now, you also realize after listening to that FCC stuff of that group, I was under the impression the FCC spent much of their time worrying about and checking on the truthfulness of certain news. That's just not true at all. They don't care. It's not part of their purview. That's not what they're in the business of doing. What they're in the business of doing is ensuring the high quality of transmissions. Like you've got a little bit, you don't have the capability, your capacity to broadcast is not sufficient. That's what they're concerned about. So they need to punish you for that. Or if you happen to show a woman's breast if you happen to show it at all on regular network television, well, you're going to be fined severely because nudity is disgusting, apparently. It's horrible. It impacts our children in negative ways, right? Our society is marred, is made worse by the fact that we are underneath our clothes naked. And women have breasts, and we're not supposed to ever know that. In fact, at Macy's, I noticed they have these things, I don't know if they call them like gel pads or something, I forget what they're called. But they're literally like little stickers that you put over your nipples, so that if you have pointy nipples, they're not going to be so pointy underneath your clothes. Now, to me, I see nipples as a beautiful thing. And if I had my way, there would be little holes where the nipples would actually poke out of the clothes so that you could actually see and admire them. But instead, they want to cover them up and pretend they don't exist. And that's fine. That's fine. That's America. Good, hey, that's America as it exists today, but it doesn't have to be that way tomorrow. You and I can make a difference. We can do something to change that. So keep that in mind. We're not stuck with what we've got. It's never been that way. We make change. There are big changes that occur over time, and it just takes, a certain confluence of things. And other times it's just a magical occurrence, it seems. I remember my father once telling me that it takes like roughly 70 years for any of these big truths to ever be revealed and accepted as true down the line. And I thought, well, you know what? That's how it has been. It doesn't have to be that way. Do you know, there is some interest in doing some work on the Boston Marathon bombing. If you recall, in 2013, there was a bomb that went off. A couple of bombs, apparently. Some kind of theatrical bombs exploded. causing a bunch of, of course they did announce that the bombs are going off. There was a tweet that went out, and then also there was an announcement over the loudspeakers there to not be concerned about the theatrical explosions that were about to be right across from the library. They even indicated exactly where. Excuse me. So, that's something to keep in mind about when considering the legitimacy of the event. So we had this bombing. Of course, everybody lost legs. Nobody lost arms. It's the bombing, it's the marathon. So it's the marathon, you lose your legs. I mean, if you're going to write the narrative, you're not going to have people losing arms, hands, being blinded. None of those things are going to happen. It's all going to be legs. You're going to lose legs. So it makes perfect sense, right? Well, on that day, do you recall there was also an explosion and a fire at the JFK library? Do you recall that? How interesting. And it was around that time, or soon thereafter, that they also announced that even though they had said they were going to release some of the information at the 50-year mark, they said, screw it. We're going to tack on another 50 years. It's just going to be another 50 years we have to wait. So I guess my dad was wrong. It's not 70 years. It's 100 years. That's your government. That's your media. Now, the press, in a free press, wouldn't we be angry about that? Why do they have to conceal this information? You should watch a film. It's like a 1973. It's called Executive Action. It might be later in the 70s, but I think it was the 70s. It's called Executive Action. And it basically just shows you some newsreel footage of the JFK's assassination and, of course, the lead up to it. But at the same time, for the most part, just shows you the behind the scenes of a cabal of businessmen and government, some of the leaders at that time. They don't identify them by name, but you get a sense of who they are. And they're plotting to deal with JFK. It seems as if these guys they're either involved in military affairs or industrialists of some kind. And so they want the war in Vietnam to continue, and some other things that would be important. I think some of that had to do with the media. Anyway, watch that movie. It tells you what happened. And it tells you a little bit about Oswald's background. Because everyone wants to make Oswald out to be this loner, this weirdo. Now, he may have been an interesting character, that's for sure. But at the same time, was he a hero? Well, I think he may have been. Isn't that odd? Of all the people to call a hero, would Oswald be a candidate? How could it be that he was a hero? Well, I think he was. I think it's very likely he was. And, when you look at what they're showing as Oswald's background and the events that occurred around the time he was a defector to the Soviet Union and then he re-defects back to America and how that all went down, I mean, you can see that Oswald was just, there's no way in hell he was a nobody. And I also think Marina, and this accounts, I think, for some of the marital strife they had here in America, but I think they both knew that they were agents of some kind when they got married, and it just was an arrangement that they had. So, but I think in the end it wound up being difficult because they were both being pressured, and Marina, I think, started getting some very, very serious pressure towards the end there, in the weeks to days leading up to the assassination itself. I also have a documentary, and it's just called JFK Assassination Quickie. And fairy tales can be dangerous, is what it's called, a JFK Assassination Quickie. And you should check it out. It's on my Tyranny News Network channel. I get a lot of heat for it. I had to take it down and repost it because YouTube took it down, just like they took down my Manson murders documentary, which was fairly lengthy and I thought very good. It was based on the work of Miles W. Mathis. Anyway, I digress again. We've come to the end of the show. I hope you enjoyed at least getting a preview of some of the work that we intend to put out as a result of Fix the Media, the greater project, as it grows into a movement to reclaim the media in America by returning it to the people. I don't have in front of me, and I'm not going to take the time to go dig it out, the information on next week's show, but I assure you it's going to be as good or better than any of the other shows. We probably will have a guest this time. I just don't remember who the heck it is. We'll find out together, won't we? on Thursday at 10 p.m. Eastern when Fix the Media returns to the airwaves. Please make sure to pencil it in at least, and maybe even listen to the show, or you can catch it again by replays on the Awake Radio Network. I want to say thank you to Ed Opperman and the other hosts on the Awake Radio Network. I'm very happy to be a part of this, and I know that this is turning into something the sum is greater than its parts kind of thing. But I'm getting all sappy, so let's just move on and close the show. This is Fix the Media. I'm your host, Peter Klein. Please return next week, and we will do this all again, and eventually we're going to fix this media. Thank you very much, and have a good night.